Test. My visual audio engineer testing. Like 28 RSVPs, and it's so funny with these things because like sometimes nobody comes until like the last second, or they might jump on Zoom. So we just don't know.
I feel like didn't it happen last week where you guys were like,
oh my God, last week we didn't have a speaker until 12:03 and no audience, and then all of a sudden at 12:05 the whole room was full, and it was like, okay, we're good. That was terrifying.
Everyone comes like 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
The most terrifying thing ever.
Can't say
the other thing too is with the LinkedIn Live, because I know I've joined it from LinkedIn Live, and it's like we in the room can't tell who's there. So it's like some of those people might be out there listening, we just don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I've never done a LinkedIn Live. I've been Facebook Live, but LinkedIn Live I've never done.
I think it's like only for pages. I don't know if you can do it on a profile. I said you need to talk about it.
It looks really nice when you're watching these from LinkedIn Live. So usually, like if I can't make it in the room, that's how I connect, because I watch through that.
Yeah. Hi Joyce, hi Jack. Hope you're doing good.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello. We're still waiting on Carolyn. So usually what we do is we just have you like, you can introduce yourself and you can kind of like ask Carolyn to introduce herself and speak a little bit about her background, and then you can do questions of your own until like 12:30 or 12, yeah, like 12:30, and then we can open it up to Zoom, in person, LinkedIn, kind of whatever. And along the way, if there's somebody who asks them, yeah. Hi there, Carolyn.
Hi.
Hi, how are you all doing?
Good.
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
We will introduce ourselves in just a minute. Actually, why don't we just go around and do that now before we start going live on LinkedIn. And then, so I mean, I'll just start really quick since I'm already talking because I'm gonna get up and shut the door. I'm Megan Kuhar. I'm the marketing lead for the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship. So I will be kind of manning the live stream here, and also if there's any questions that are on Zoom or on LinkedIn, I will I'll flag them up on our screen here so that Ben can see them and funnel them to you. Thank you for being here, and excited for this conversation.
Hi, I'm Ben. We talked on the phone on Tuesday.
Yay, hi Ben, nice to meet you.
Nice to finally meet you in person.
Sure. My name is Stacy. Carolyn, it's nice to meet you. I work for the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship as well. I work with Megan.
Nice to meet you.
My name is Matt. I run a writing and video production company called Story Design Media here in Cleveland. Nice to meet you.
Fantastic. Well, nice to meet you all.
And we have some folks on Zoom. If anyone wants to introduce themselves, feel free to unmute and do that.
Hi, Carolyn, it's Joyce.
Hello, Joyce. Nice to know you're here. That's great.
Joyce Fitzpatrick from the Shaughnessy Nurse Leadership Academy.
I suppose I'll go next then. Jack Fitzgerald, program manager with the Marion K. Shaughnessy Nurse Leadership Academy. Carolyn, here to support.
Thanks, Jack. Nice to hear from you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joel Koch. I am a student in the Cold Iron Fellowship.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad you could join us, Joelle. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
I'm Kathy Dunn, and I'm retired. I live in San Diego.
What did you retire from, Kathy?
I was a clinical nurse specialist for 45 years in,
Oh my goodness.
in spinal cord injury care. And I still work as a volunteer, running a website for people with spinal cord injuries and their families.
Oh my goodness.
Providing health advice and breaking up disputes.
Well, that's brilliant. I guess it's true. If you're always a nurse, right? You kind of never stop helping in one way, shape, or form. So bravo for the work that you're doing.
Since we are kind of going over a little, let's get started. And then when folks that are on Zoom, if you ever have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. We're gonna have Ben facilitate the first part of this conversation, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. And when we do that, definitely introduce yourself before you ask your question, so that we can kind of get to know who you are. And so I'm gonna go ahead and start the stream on LinkedIn. It takes a couple seconds to actually go, so I will give Ben the thumbs up when we're actually live. Actually, it takes a minute.
Hi, Carolyn. I'll introduce myself and then I will ask you about your introduction. So my name, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Benjamin Nestor. I'm a senior here at Case Western. I'm majoring in marketing and minoring in film. And I met Professor Goldberg, and he introduced me to Carolyn, and we came here to talk about the dynamics of funding documentaries. And Carolyn, if you could give us a little bit of your background, a little bit of introduction into who you are, what you do, and what we're going to talk about today, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm Carolyn Jones, and I'm a filmmaker and a photographer. I really started in the business as a photographer, actually in fashion photography in New York City many years ago. And my whole career has evolved into storytelling about things that I think really make a difference in this world that we're living in. The first book I published was a book about people living with AIDS called Living Proof: Courage in the Face of AIDS. And that really brought me to a place in my career where I realized I wanted to dig in on things that really matter and use the abilities I have to do storytelling through photography and filmmaking to share those stories. About 12 years ago, I was asked to do a project about nurses. And with all of the people that I've met in my life and all the work that I've done, and I've had an opportunity to do, shoot for magazines and record album covers and all kinds of different things over the years, nothing grabbed my heart quite the way the nurse profession did. And it just hasn't really let me go yet. So I started looking at the world through the lens of nurses. So the first thing that I did was this book, The American Nurse. And then I went on to make 3 films, working on a 4th now, that look at issues in our country through the lens of a nurse. I call myself an ethnographer loosely, because that's kind of a branch of anthropology where you study an individual culture and you kind of do it from the point of view from the subject. And since I spend so much time looking through the lens of nurses at the issues that our country's dealing with, that seems to be the closest thing that I could come up with to describe what I do. So that's basically where I am now, working on a 4th film that looks at issues in America through the lens of nurses.
Awesome, thank you. I got to speak briefly with Carolyn a few days ago to kind of lay the land of what we're going to talk about today. And there was 2 kind of arms to the approach of the discussion. One of them was the nonprofit 100 People Foundation. So Carolyn, could you talk to us a little bit about that and how that came to be?
Sure. So I'm always kind of looking at the world that we live in and what I can do to make a difference. And I don't know if you've all seen this, but many years ago, I got this email that came across my desk that was, if the world were 100 people, what would it look like? If you actually take the statistics in the world and reduce the world's population to 100, but keep those statistics intact, what's the breakdown look like? How many of us, what religions would we be? What languages would we speak? How many of us would have safe drinking water? How many of us would be able to get a college education? And I really thought it gave this kind of wonderful snapshot of the world. And I decided when I saw it that I wanted to bring those numbers to life. I wanted to find 100 people that could represent the world population, and have students introduce me to people all around the world that they admire that fit the criteria for the statistics. So it's a nonprofit called the 100 People Foundation. The website is the number 100people.org. And when I first sort of came up with the idea, we needed funding to create the foundation and to pursue the idea. And it was the beginning of my fundraising journey, really. And I started very close to home, like, and I've always done it this way, like, who cares about what it is that I have to say, and who's on a similar mission? So it might seem like a long shot, but at the time, there's a bank called Washington Mutual Bank, which has since been kind of absorbed by JP Morgan Chase. But at the time, Washington Mutual was a bank that was very focused on knowing your community. And the whole 100 People Project is really about know who you share this planet with, and know who's in your community, so that you can learn to respect the people that you live next door to. So I went to Washington Mutual and kind of worked my way up there to raise the first $100,000 for the foundation. And so that gave us the opportunity to create a lot of educational material, and that was the jump start. After that, I connected with a couple of different companies. I was looking at the resources in the world, and if the world were 100 people, you know, what kind of electricity do we use? What kind of energy are we going through? And so it became kind of a natural idea to go to a solar energy company, which I was interested in educating people about. And so I went to a company called SunPower in California, and they decided to send us on a around the world trip to explore solar energy in different parts of the world, everywhere from the Amazon and the Philippines to California. And that was in Australia. So that was also really interesting, gave us some more media that we could post on our website, and gave us a chance to work with a solar energy company in a really interesting way. From there, we went to Intel, and I was interested in promoting some of the students who had won at the science fair. So they also got on board, and I filmed several students that had won the Intel Science Fair that year, and that brought us to a moment where I was at a conference with the students that I met, and we were able to get Bill Gates to work with us and to meet all of the students and to be able to get footage of all that. So each funding opportunity was a stepping stone and offered me an opportunity to the next person. Fundraising is definitely not my favorite part of projects that I do. I think if I haven't met anybody who's like, yeah, I love fundraising. So it's a tough thing that you have to do, but I have always found it to be a lot less painful when you find people of like minds, people that really have a very similar mission that you do. And so we've been able to keep the 100 People Foundation kind of running along, and it's a wonderful school project that students still from all over the world are doing. But that's basically the fundraising route that we took. Oh, and we had also gone to the Merck Foundation because I wanted to look at healthcare around the world. So I'm usually combining this kind of fundraising with, you know, what we needed to keep the foundation running and create educational materials, but also an opportunity to go somewhere and tell a story. For Merck, we told the story of healthcare in India. So that gave us an opportunity to, again, add media to the website where the students were going. So that's pretty much the journey of 100 People.
Thank you so much. On the topic of 100 people, a lot of students and a lot of entrepreneurs, I think like one of the things that stops them is some resistance in going off is like the diving in and trying to find money and like committing to an idea. Like everyone has their passion, but like kind of being a self-starter is really hard. Do you have any advice for somebody who's trying to go, you know, start a nonprofit like yours, or just go start any kind of entrepreneurial endeavor?
Yeah, I mean, figure out who your, who your advisors are. Figure out who you can reach out to. It's start really close. People, I have found over the years that people, if you feel strongly about what you do and you're able to express that, people want to come on board to ideas. People want to come on board to things that want to make the world a better place. And so I've just found that as long as I was really forthcoming about what I was working on, I would always start really close to home, like just get my friends together for an evening where I could kick ideas around and put some visuals together in a PowerPoint and say, what do you think about this? And who do you know that might help me? That's how I have started every single project that I have done, is just keeping the circle of people that I know in my life, and asking how they can help. And, I have just always found that, again, if you're passionate and it's a solid idea, you can usually get people behind you, and start small. There are a lot of people a lot younger than I am that are very adept at the whole Kickstarter idea. And I know that that's a way of getting things going that isn't a path that I choose to take for a myriad of reasons. But I know that that is one way that people can go, and maybe they're more comfortable with if they're starting out now. I still think, people are often nervous about corporate funding, or don't know how to go about foundation funding. And again, I remember in the very beginning, I signed up with New York Foundation for the Arts, which is a nonprofit organization in New York City that helps people like me, that are on their own, and guides them in terms of grant writing and how to ask for money, and just other people to kind of sympathize with you. But lots of ways to, kind of approach it. So that's another thing to do, is find a local organization that could potentially function as your fiscal sponsor if you're not interested in setting up a legal entity right away, but you have a great idea. Then they can function as your fiscal sponsor until you get started. So if somebody wants to put money into your project, they can run it through a nonprofit that has already vetted you. And I really highly recommend that way for starting a foundation.
Thank you. Now let's shift into the stuff I can like to talk about, the film and the documentaries aspects. So you said that you wrote a book on the American nurse, and like most of all of your documentaries thus far have been through the lens of nursing. You talked about nurses being a passion project. Have you ever looked into any other types of lenses being one of the things for your documentaries?
Oh, I guess the answer to your question is I contemplate other lenses all the time. I'm interested in things in our country like the opioid crisis and gun violence and our prison system and poverty and the lack of health insurance and mental health and all of these different issues that kind of consume my waking hours. And I haven't found a lens I like better. We live in this world of technology where there's so much specialization, right? And nurses are people that are able to look at us holistically, and especially the nurse leaders in the world, that not only are they looking at the issues, but they're looking at the teams that they need to put together to help solve those issues. And they do this in a way that's non-political for the most part, non-judgmental, and is really focused on one thing. And that's just making things better, making that human being better. So I have not found a lens in my career ever that I have found as fulfilling and opening as the nurse lens. So I choose to stay here for a bit longer. I think that not everybody has to choose a different lens to look through. I'm not in the healthcare industry. I've been doing these films now for 10 to 12 years, but I'm not a nurse. I wasn't trained in healthcare in any way, shape, or form. So I needed to sort of be on someone's back to take me into a world that I didn't fully understand to make sure I got it right. So I'm kind of very happy to have found nurses to be able to look at some of the issues that are so political in our country right now.
Amazing, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Somebody wants to know where they can see all the films. And Kathy Dunn says that she's a good friend with Brian McMillan, who was in The American Nurse.
Oh, wow. Okay. So first of all, you can get all the films on Amazon. I have a wonderful distribution company called Kino Lorber, and they're great. And they do all of our educational licenses, and they do a lot of promotional stuff. And so it's wonderful to go straight to them. But I have found for people that the easiest thing to do is to go to Amazon, where they're all available, or Apple TV, they're all there as well. So first of all, I love that Kathy knew Brian McMillan. Let me just tell you briefly, Brian McMillan was a military nurse that I met in San Diego when I was doing the book, The American Nurse, and he had just come back from a deployment. And he had been working with some of our soldiers that were going to a hospital in Germany called Landstuhl. And this was particularly interesting to me because of the technologies available. These soldiers are coming back with injuries that would have just a few years ago ended their lives, but now they're coming back, and they were just heroes a minute ago, and now they're coming back to this country and they need help getting through each day. And I wondered who had the capacity to know what to say and how to make them be able to re-enter society in a powerful way. And when I met Brian McMillan, he just completely knocked my socks off. So he was in the book, and I did an interview with him when he had just come back from the deployment. And it was just, everything was so raw. And so when we decided to do the film, The American Nurse, he was one of the 5 nurses that I followed. And it was an honor to get to follow him. And for every nurse, I would have to say that about every nurse, but he was special because he's a military nurse. So he's seen combat, and he was truly able to be really compassionate and understand exactly what these soldiers had been through.
I mean, that's incredible. And that was a really awesome kind of thing for Kathy to come in and give a little bit of anecdotal evidence. I'm a filmmaker, and one thing that I always have a struggle with is that I find in the industry is that people are artists first and not business people. So when they're trying to finance their movie, like plan accordingly, maybe try to start their own production company or whatever it may be, they can't figure out how to organize themselves because they're so invested in the artistic aspect. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to find that balance between the creativity and the logistics of it all?
A lot of people have a lot of great ideas out there, and they're wonderful ideas, but you need to bring them to fruition. So you need to be able to cultivate in any way that you can the business aspect of this, because we're in a field of communication. And if you're truly an artist that is content, and I wish I was this kind of artist, but I'm not, content, being able to create your artwork, and what matters is making it, then that's one category. If you want to communicate to anybody, the public, a specific group of people, you're creating your idea to be able to get it out there, to be able to communicate, then you're going to have to figure out how to market it. And you can't be scared or back off from the idea of business and marketing. It very much has to be a part of your entire process. From the minute you think of it, because I think that when we think about communicating an idea, we have to think about who's our audience. What are you trying to say to who? And you can't really just come out of the gate saying, well, I have this great idea and I want everybody to know about it. Well, you got to figure out, who your specific market is, and then branch out from that. But who actually really cares or can benefit from what you're doing? And then you build from there. So those are some of the people that you might go to for funding, or those are the people that you go to for advice to figure out how to streamline whatever your idea is into something that can be of use to people. So I think very often there's I went to photojournalism school. I consider myself, as much of a purist as I am, that I'm comfortable with. I very much believe in documentary filmmaking being a way to tell the truth, to be an observer and a witness and not alter the scene in any way, to be able to really present the information in an honest and true way. So searching for truth is very much a part of my everyday process. That isn't inconsistent with figuring out who your market is and who you need to talk to and who you need to go to raise money for that. Because if you have something to say, getting it out there is really, really key. And so I think we mustn't be afraid as purists or artists or whoever we are to say, you know, how am I going to get there? Who's this for? And how can I get to that audience? And what's my distribution going to look like? And once I make this film, have I built in what needs to be done after? So now you're sitting on this film, but you don't have a distributor and you don't have any budget left for outreach and engagement. Well, that's a problem, because let's face it, another film on YouTube isn't necessarily where you want to be. You know, it's hard to break through. There's a lot of material and media out there these days. So to get through, you really need to be, from the very beginning, very certain about what your path is going to be. I'm not sure that completely answered your question.
I think it answered it more than what I had beforehand. We have a question in the chat from Rebecca Patton asking, with your lens today, if you were meeting with legislators, what would you share about nursing? What suggestions would you give them to help the profession meet the needs of the public?
You know, no matter who I'm talking to, I think my message about nursing is pretty consistent. We don't understand and respect who nurses are, what level of education they have, and what they're capable of. We need to learn to listen. And I think that this is an issue across the board in our country, that we're all talking very loudly, but not listening enough. As far as the legislation goes, I believe with all my heart that if we understood what nurses are capable of doing and let them do it, let them function to the full extent of their education, this country would be in a much better place. And I don't think that people know enough about the profession and often have this kind of conception about it being this warm, fuzzy, caring, touch, soft field, which that is part of it. But there's also this fiercely intelligent, competent, holistic way of understanding what makes people tick and what makes the world a better place that nurses have because of what they know and how they look at the world. So I feel as though there's this education that needs to happen with the American public in general about the profession of nursing, and that we need to start looking at it ourselves through a completely different lens and understand how incredibly competent people are that do this work.
Thank you. There's another question about the lens that you use nurses. Have you ever thought about teachers in the same way? And in this discussion, they said that many are very devoted and passionate, much like nurses, but they're paid much less than nurses.
That's interesting that you asked that, because I'm actually asked this a lot about if I could shift my focus over to teachers, and you know, I have teachers in the family, and I'm very and the whole 100 People Foundation is very much a teaching project. So education is critical, and I think it's as critical in a way as everything else. However, my personal passion, and I think that, look, let's face it, as filmmakers, it is not an easy path. I mean, this is not like this is not a money-making adventure. Filmmaking is definitely, especially documentary filmmaking, it's certainly unbelievably rewarding, but it's a passion thing. And so for me, it's nursing that has caught my heart. It's nursing that, because it's the human body, because we have nothing without our health, because we can't even be educated if we're not healthy, because We will each need a nurse either at the beginning of life or at the end of life. This is such a universal humanitarian kind of profession that it just has grabbed me completely. So if I ever feel like I was kind of finished with nursing, which is really kind of hard for me to get my brain around, I would probably move into the educational field. One of the things that I loved when I was working on The American Nurse was one of my favorite people was meeting a school nurse. And so is sort of talking about education and talking about what the kids needed to be able to learn during a day. And it got me really thinking about education. So long answer to your question. If I live another 50 years, yeah, probably I'm going to scoot into education.
Speaking of education and being involved in it, a lot of students don't really understand, a lot of students aren't really involved in like documentaries. You know, there's the Netflix docuseries on like mostly serial killers for some whatever reason. But there's a lot of documentaries that people like don't typically watch. What is because they're not available to students or they're not biggest interest. How do you reach like a younger demographic or a demographic that you might not be looking for in the market?
Oh, that's a good question. So we have a couple of different ways that we try to do that. First of all, I think we're living in a remarkable time for documentaries, just by the way. We have so many more resources and media outlets for documentaries, so they are more readily available. There was 10 years ago, I couldn't have told you all my stuff would be with one distributor or on Amazon or any place else for that matter. It was hard to get a lot harder to get documentaries made. I think, and what we're witnessing over the last decade is that there's a huge surge in interest for documentaries across the board in all age groups. For me, when I do these projects, it's very important that that I get to students because I'm interested in a few things. I'm interested in anybody going into the medical profession, kind of getting an inside look to some of the things that I've been able to see. That's the beauty of documentary filmmaking for me is access. When you get access, that's the gift, right? Because everybody can't be everywhere and learn everything. But I just spent 2 years in emergency departments all across America, looking at some of the different issues that people are dealing with. And it let me kind of go in behind those closed doors that nobody ever wants to go behind and examine what goes on in emergency departments. So that information becomes information for students considering that kind of path. So in terms of people in the healthcare profession or anybody who's interested in the healthcare profession, we try to make all of these films and we kind of break them up into educational pods, if you will, and so that people can explore some of these different issues. We make them available at colleges and universities. And so we do have a very, very robust educational outreach effort that we make with our distributor to get everything in schools. The other thing that has been very successful for us getting into a younger demographic has been film festivals. And I think as filmmakers, you got to do the festivals. It's not the only thing to do because it isn't the world that it was. It used to be that if you got into a film festival and you did well, you might pick up distribution. And I don't know if anybody keeps up with this except for me, but like at Sundance this year, so many great documentaries don't get picked up with distributors anymore in that kind of venue. But that doesn't mean that festivals don't draw a lot of attention. They get a lot of local attention. We've been in festivals all over the country with our films, and that usually is a younger demographic because then you just get people coming into the festivals that are interested in filmmaking, and some of them are documentaries and some of them are not, depending on which festival it is, of course. And I just think that's been very productive. And then sometimes, you know, that leads to something else. Someone will be in that audience that brings it to their university or whatever.
So you said you're working on a project right now. Could you tell us a little bit about it and how it's going in the process?
So yeah, you know, it's even even with the stage that I'm at, these are journeys, documentary filmmaking. And I think that sometimes we'll start with an idea that's a nugget of an idea of what we want to do. And one of the things that we wanted for this new project that I'm working on, which is called The Catalysts, is to really look at the way nurses are actually moving the needle on some of the biggest health issues in the world. So we went to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and looked at those and wanted to look at programs that nurses are running that affect entire communities, because once you affect a community, you do affect that entire society. So we started off with this very big idea, this global idea that we're going to go to 5 different parts of the world and tell these stories of these different programs that are changing the world. So that's a lot to get your brain around. And I think as we go, what we decided to start in the United States, and we decided to start with maternal mortality. So I don't know if this is something that you're all aware of, but the United States, which spends more money on healthcare, it's nuts what we spend on healthcare, and it hasn't produced the results that we want, right? Our lifespan isn't, we're not number one. I forget what number we are, but we're not doing that well. And one of the things that's really dismal is our maternal mortality rate. For a wealthy country, we are just not doing well in this at all. And it's particularly bad for Black women in America. So this topic of maternal mortality, which is definitely a global issue, definitely one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal objectives is to reduce maternal mortality. We've decided is kind of a big enough topic in itself, and it's been so in the news recently that I think it's really important as filmmakers that we're able to kind of pivot on what's going on now. I have a better example of that. We were working on the last film I did, In Case of Emergency, and we had spent this 2 years going all across the country in all these emergency departments, looking at all these different issues. That film was finished. That film was edited, the music was scored, and it was finished. It was finished in March of 2020. And COVID had just hit, and COVID was on the tip of everybody's tongue. And I said, we can't release this film because this is going on in our emergency departments. And we had no idea where it was going to go or how long it was going to last or anything. But we pulled that film back and said, hang on a second, we're not going to release it now. We're going to try to get back into the emergency department and capture at least some sense. I mean, look, none of the problems went away during COVID. They all just got buried under it, right? And they're all still there, all these issues that we were looking at. But we needed to be able to acknowledge what the country had gone through and what nurses were going through. So I think of that as being fairly light on our feet, being able to be willing to take those chances and pull back and change direction when you have to, because it's timely, because it matters now, because people want to know about it. And I think because we were able to go back to the hospitals that we'd already established, certainly one hospital that we'd already established a really good relationship with, we were able to get that footage in our film, and it changed the trajectory of our film. Obviously, we had to raise more money at the last minute to do it because we had been finished. But the result of that got us we were much more visible. And ultimately, that film won the best documentary at the United Nations Film Festival in California. And I was really, really proud of that because I think we were able to address something that mattered. So in terms of this film now, what started off as an idea of making one film with kind of 5 different development goals has turned into what may be a life's worth of work of looking at each item by itself first. So it could end up being a series where we could end up still doing exactly what we originally intended to do. But this first film, this idea of maternal mortality, from a global perspective is really critical for us to understand. And I think it warrants its own documentary because there are so many aspects to it. So that's pretty much what I'm working on. We want to kind of look at we want to learn from other countries as we're doing this. So we kind of want to look at maternal mortality in a couple other different places in the world and compare it to what we've got going on here. We want to examine the problems, but we're really looking for solutions. We want to show where people are getting it right. I personally feel as though there's enough negative media out in the world that I don't need to cover that. I just feel like between newspapers and everything else, maybe it's my optimistic nature, it's the way I'm put together, I'm not sure, but I want to know about solutions. I want to know what will make things better. Who's got something figured out that's working? And so that's what we're going to try to show with this current film. And I think Catalysts is such a great name for it, because we're really looking at, and we have one on the line here today, which is Joyce Fitzpatrick. We're looking at people that are able to make huge changes in the world. And they don't even always know how far the ripple effect is from the work that they do. But that's something I'm really interested in, is kind of following that path and meeting the catalysts in the world who are making change. And that's the desire with this film.
Thank you so much. Joyce Fitzpatrick had a question to talk about your passion for nursing. Joyce, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Carolyn, for all of your passion for nursing. My question is, what do you think that we as nurses can do to help you? Because as we've talked about the film that you're currently working on, we've discovered that nurses in the field, the rank and file nurses, don't always know your work. And your work is so important to us telling our story. And yet we haven't told our story to ourselves. And so, it's like, what can we do to help you get the message out?
So thank you for the question, Joyce. I mean, first of all, you're already moving mountains, and I think, visibility is probably the first thing. Look, nurses are so interesting to me. For whatever reason, and I have a couple theories about this, which I won't go into, but they're not always able to tell their own story. And look, it's much easier for any of us in any profession that we're in, for an outsider to come in and be able to see when you do something every day, you don't see anymore. So that's become kind of my job, I think. And I think it should be the job of the media in general. I wish there were 10 more people doing what I'm doing, because I think it's so important. But nurses coming forth to tell their story and being willing to tell their story is so critical. The public will never understand the profession unless we have nurses really out there, telling people what they do every day and being involved in the world in a bigger way. The problem, I think, is that it's such an overwhelming field, and it takes so much out of the people who are doing this work that at the end of the day, I've found that, there isn't a lot of room for promotion or for getting out there. I've always said, and I really feel strongly about this, I wish every single hospital and every single university was doing more to give nurses the tools to share their stories, to do media training, to be able to present themselves in a way that will start to change public opinion and to be able to get out there more in the world. Now, this isn't right for every nurse. But it is right for a lot of them. And I often say that it's just such an interesting profession. I'll sit down to interview a nurse. Now, this can be a nurse that's been nominated. It's not like I just go into a hospital and randomly talk to people. These are nurses that have been recommended by, the nurse leaders in that hospital and their colleagues often. They've often won awards, and they'll sit down with me, and the first thing that they will say is, oh, there might be somebody better for you to talk to than me. And I'm always like, no, you're exactly who I want to talk to. And so I think that there's this thing that nurses can do to, as I say, maybe it's media training, maybe there's another way to do it. Get used to telling your story, get used to being able to stand somewhere and tell people what you do with the pride that it demands. But since the public doesn't understand what you do, they don't know how much to be able to admire and respect and listen to the knowledge that you've garnered. So that's kind of the conundrum, right? If you're not comfortable telling your story, then the public doesn't know. And so then people like me come into the picture. So I'm here to tell the story because this lens that I've had the opportunity to look through gives me an insight into the things in our country that need to be fixed in no other way that I've ever encountered. So getting the word out, the more people know about the work that we're doing, I don't care how it's used, whether it's used in a high school to encourage people to go into the profession, or whether it's used to raise awareness about gun violence or the opioid crisis or emergency rooms in general, or whatever, however it's used. But the dream I always had, to kind of really get to your question, was that nurses would grab 2 people or 5 people, but at least 2, and show them a film that touches whatever film touches them. So if you're in palliative care, that you would show people the film Defining Hope that follows, patients dealing with life-threatening illnesses and the nurses who are guiding them through that. Because I tell you, the biggest compliment I ever get is when we show a film and somebody's husband or daughter or mother or father comes up to me and says, I had no idea what this person I love who's a nurse did every day, day in and day out until now. And now I have a better understanding of that. So if we could expand kind of that way, like have nurses bring more people into their inner circle. But, it's complicated. There's HIPAA rules, there's all kinds of things. So that's why our films have been vetted that way. And maybe a nurse can't come home and talk about what she did that day or he did that day. But they can take their friends or family to a film or rent it or show it at home or something and give people more of an insight into the work that they do so that the public could begin to understand what an extraordinary group of people that we have that we're not accessing for information and change. And I think that's really the biggest thing is to get the word out about what we're trying to do, which is give nurses a voice.
Awesome. We have a question from in the room.
Yeah, hi Carolyn. This is Matt again. So filmmaking for nonprofit organizations is an interesting cycle of fundraising, right? So they have to find funds to pay us to create a film that helps them fundraise. And hopefully it's used in a way that they'll ideally see a net positive on that investment that they made. And that'll help fund the next project to help them continue to fundraise for the important work they're doing. But often I've found that organizations don't know what to do with it once you deliver the product, and they often don't get to see that return on the investment of a good storytelling medium that helps get the word out. And so how do we help them to figure out in turn what to do with the product to help them raise funds so that that cycle can continue?
So I think it comes back to distribution, which is, always the challenge is where's it being shown and who's showing it and what's the audience and who's the market. So you're talking about a foundation who hires you to create a film for the foundation that promotes what they're doing, right? Do I have that right? Okay, so let's look at Bill Gates for a second, and those, if you're familiar with some of the documentaries that are done that capture the work that they're doing, that's kind of in a space by itself. They're extraordinary. Are you familiar with some of those short films?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, even those which are incredibly well produced and a lot of them really gorgeous and powerful, I think I don't have a wide distribution channel. So, you know, I think, look, return on investment or being able to use this stuff again, it just are these, and these are short pieces, right? These are these pieces that.
Yeah, these are short
Yeah, okay.
pieces that they are relying on to push their mission forward. Yeah.
Right, right. And there, I assume all the obvious things are already on the table, like the social media options and yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just a big believer, not to be redundant, and I don't have the answers to all the questions, but if it was me, you know, I would try to create a film that could also be put into short film festivals. You know, there are some wonderful, and it's actually a really interesting field to look at that. I don't really do shorts at the moment. I did a lot of shorts for the 100 People Foundation, but right now I'm working on full-length documentaries, but there are some wonderful short film festivals. And I think it's not actually as competitive as the full-length doc festivals, and they're looking for great stuff. And I've been to some of those festivals and there's a lot of not great stuff. So I think that might be one outlet to dig into and maybe explore a little bit that could be helpful. I think, you know, the festival thing is a funny thing anyway. People, it's a different market, right? It's a whole different audience that you're able to reach. It's so funny with Zoom because I find myself looking at you at the table. It's so that you're up there. You know, I think that I just think that there are a lot of festivals right now. People like them. It's very popular, and I think they get overlooked, and they shouldn't. Or people think it's frustrating because there are too many, or they're never going to get in, or whatever. So that's the best advice I have for you, I'm afraid.
Sorry to everybody who asked questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for coming. We really appreciated talking to you, and I think we got a lot of really great things. At least I learned a lot of great things. So it was a pleasure having you here.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
From the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship, thank you all so much for coming. Next week on March 7th, we have Sasang Udosan, who's from Google. She's a UX consultant. She's going to be talking about using design thinking to expand your career vision. So a really cool conversation just to like open your mind about where to head in your career. And it's going to be a similar setup to what we have today. So we hope you all join us. And thank you so much, Carolyn, for being here.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.